and welcome to the Life of Learning podcast. I'm Eustace Frank, and last night I went along to something really interesting. It was organised by the Riccarton Community Church here in Christchurch, and it was a talk titled Gentle Assertiveness, and the person who was presenting the talk was Richard Black. And because this was a predominantly Christian event, Richard used a Bible verse to make it his kind of main point. And that was the Bible verse. It comes from Ephesians 4 verse 15, and just a short snippet which talks about speaking the truth in love. And in essence, that's another way of saying basically gentle assertiveness. As Richard pointed out, assertiveness is primarily about being honest and being truthful. When you're being assertive, you're honestly stating what your wants, your needs, what your thoughts are, what your reactions are, what your feelings are. And that's what it means to be assertive, is to state plainly what it is that you want and what it is that you need. But when we withdraw from being assertive, we're usually doing it for some reason that we think that our wants, our needs, our thoughts, our reactions or feelings are somehow not valid. That somehow they shouldn't be part of the discussion. And yeah, we attempt to be submissive, and in being submissive, by not speaking up and not stating our wants and our needs, we end up often being dishonest. It might be dishonest through not actually, through our silence. That might be a form of dishonesty. Or sometimes we will go along in agreement with somebody simply because we do not want to state our own needs, our own preferences. And in that sense, we'll be dishonest and often even lie, just to maintain that submissive stance. So if you're speaking the truth, you are actually being assertive, and it takes a fair amount of self-esteem and confidence to speak the truth. The in love part from the speaking the truth in love. So the in love part is kind of equivalent to the being gentle part. Exactly. We don't want to bash people over the head with truth. We don't want it to come across as an attack. And in essence, what it means is that you are honest with the things that are your responsibility. That when we have these conversations, when we're speaking the truth in love, your focus remains on discussing and speaking about what you actually know. So we're not trying to interpret or mind read the other person, i.e. what you actually do know is your own wants, your own needs, your own thoughts, your reactions and your feelings, and instead of focusing on mind reading and trying to attack the other person's wants, the other person's needs, the other person's thoughts, their emotions, which we may not fully understand or even know. When you speak to the other person gently, you aren't coming across in an attack mode. But by being assertive, you're not seeking to attack or cross over to their boundary and impose yourself on their area of responsibility. And this idea of boundaries and responsibilities was a really key part of the talk. And so if you are watching this on video, you'll be able to see the diagrams that I draw out in this next wee section. If you're listening to this on audio, I will still be explaining what happens, and you'll still be able to understand hopefully what's happening. So I'm just going to shoot over to a different camera angle and explain what I mean by boundaries and responsibilities, and how understanding these concepts helps us to be assertive and helps us to be gently assertive, be able to speak the truth in love. Often we see the process like this. So we've got us here, and then we've got someone else over here, and what we often think is that we need to, when we're talking about boundaries, we think that we need to place a boundary around the other person, and that will keep us safe. So we try to dictate to them what they can and can't do, where they can't go. We try to set limits on how they should react, often even how they should even feel. We try to put a boundary on what their needs can be and what they are allowed to request in terms of their wants. So this is what we often try to do, is that we seek to create this boundary, to place a boundary around the other person, and we try to dictate what that boundary should be. And of course the other person gets very frustrated that they've been placed with this boundary, limitations, as you seek to put these boundaries around them, and their autonomy and their freedom is challenged. And so they very much rebel against this, and there's this kind of creates a type of war. But instead, what we should be doing is, when we are creating boundaries, it's actually about creating a boundary around ourselves. So instead of placing that on the other person. So here we've got our own personal boundary that we are responsible for, that we say that we're responsible for our wants, for our needs, for our thoughts, for our actions, for our reactions, all those sorts of things. And also, in terms of the other person, that other person is also responsible for their own needs, their wants, their reactions, their actions, their thoughts, and their emotions and their feelings. And we need to actually become comfortable with that, knowing that this is my area of responsibility, my boundary is my responsibility, and the other person's boundary is their responsibility. And I don't need to be the person drawing their boundary. I just need to be the person drawing my boundary around me. So what happens when we are speaking the truth in love is that we've got our wants, our needs, our thoughts, and our feelings, and in being assertive, we want to bring those to the boundary line. We want to bring all those wants, our wants, and our needs, and our thoughts, and our feelings. We want to bring those to the boundary line. And at the boundary line, exactly, the other person can also bring their wants, their needs, their thoughts, their feelings. And it's at this boundary line that we can negotiate. But it's not about imposing my wants or needs or thoughts or feelings onto the other person, but simply bringing it to the boundary line. And I find that really a powerful way of thinking about it. I hope that you got a lot out of that. I'm also going to put out an article, or it might even already be out, so look out for that, and you'll be able to see the diagrams in a bit more detail. So have a look at that once it comes out. Now, there's so much more that we can say regarding this topic, and there is there's more that I could say, but I'm just kind of try and keep it a little bit more brief in this section. I have another few thoughts that I want to share in maybe a further podcast. But in terms of coming back to this speaking the truth in love, I just want to share also the other verses that are kind of around it. As you know, or as you may or may not know, I am no longer a Christian, but I found this whole sort of verse kind of interesting, and there's definitely some great things we can take from it. So I'm just going to read Ephesians 4 verses 14 to 16. It says this: "Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work." And there's a couple of interesting things there. For instance, the first bit where it talks about we will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by the waves and blown about here and there by every wind of teaching. If we are being actually gently assertive, that means that we're not merely just going along with something. It's not about being submissive. If we are being assertive, it means being willing to voice your honest doubts and questions. And furthermore, if you're taking your own thinking seriously and not willing to be submissive and letting some other authority do your thinking for you, you're showing responsibility for yourself, and you are showing assertiveness. And so I find that also quite powerful, that if we take this gentle assertiveness approach, that we will actually become more clear in our thinking and hopefully also more rational in our thinking. So the last bit as well of those verses was quite interesting. So it says, "The whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work." And that's the thing, we are not living isolated. It's all fine, I guess, maintaining the responsibility for your own boundary, but we interact with other human beings, and as such, if each of us does our own part, if each of us takes responsibility for our own boundary, then we are going to build healthier and more loving relationships, and by extension also healthier communities. So I find this another really powerful thing to be thinking about, that in fact being gently assertive, while we think assertiveness can sometimes, often we get this idea that assertiveness, if someone is assertive, that will lead to conflict, and conflict is bad. But the truth is that conflict isn't bad as such, in terms of if we have differing wants and needs, that's actually fine. There's a place to negotiate, as I said before. There's a place to negotiate in the middle on the boundary. It's not like we don't have any option to negotiate, but being assertive doesn't mean that you step over that boundary into someone else's boundary and seek to draw their boundary for them. I think this is certainly a way forward in having more loving relationships. And so I found this talk really powerful. Obviously, I've sort of added a few of my own ideas, and the reason why I kind of found it really interesting was I've also been currently reading a book called Raising Competent Children by Jesper Juhl, a Scandinavian author, and I hope to share a bit more about that book in the coming wee while. But yeah, just to finish up, exactly, so to be gently assertive means to speak the truth in love. So I hope you found that helpful, and we'll see you again next time. Alright, thanks, bye.